Yeah, so I'm sure Russ and Jaco have spoke about the topic that I'm going to talk about today, and so I'll look at technology in sport, but I'm going to focus on two main threads within athletics at the minute. So once we get going, I'll go through those and hopefully provide some insight on how technology is impacting performance in athletics, middle distance running, long distance running in particular. Right, so can you all see my presentation on the screen now?
Yep, we've got you there.
Brilliant, yep. So my name's Jonathan Taylor, or Johnny, as Jaco and Russ have been calling me. I'm a lecturer in sport and exercise at Teesside University in the UK. So to give you a little bit of insight into my background before I go into the topic. So I started off as a research assistant at Teesside University 10 years ago now. I worked there for 6 years before I moved on to Middlesbrough Football Club. So to a local club in the area who, in the first year that I was there, played in the Premier League. And I spent 3 years there before I moved back into lecturing at Teesside again. So I've got a PhD that focused primarily on the use of different high-intensity interval training methods on football performance. I'm BASES accredited, which is the governing body in Britain, so the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. So before I went to Middlesbrough, I was sort of a dual career athlete, so working as a research assistant at university whilst competing as a middle distance runner internationally for Great Britain. And I did over 5,000 metres in cross country. So a little bit more detail about my areas of interest. So high intensity interval training, obviously, which I did what I did my PhD in. Fitness and performance profiling is an area that I'm really interested in, and more recently, technology and endurance sports, and more specifically running is my area of interest. So we'll move on. So session outline. So I'm going to cover two main topics, as I said. So supershoe technology, which I'm sure those who are interested in have heard a lot about, read a lot about. It's been a real controversial area in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. And also WaveLight pacing technology, which is a new technology that's involved in athletics at elite level, that has contributed to some world records being broken in 2020. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about sort of evolution of the sport and whether it's just normal for technology to advance and we should accept it, or whether there is such thing as technological doping, which is being what some experts or some members of the media have said in recent times. Right, so for those who are interested in athletics, I'm sure you've seen that a few years ago they broke 2 hours for the marathon. Eliud Kipchoge broke 2 hours for the marathon. First time a human had ever done that. Wasn't in a race that would qualify for record purposes, but it's the first time that a marathon was run under 2 hours. And what was interesting about the way they did this or achieved this was not necessarily the athlete's physiology, but the sort of technological innovations they used when they were planning the attempt. So they used a light pacing technology that was on the back of a car. They used a number of pacemakers that were all in a certain formation, which was found to give the best sort of air resistance or reduction of air resistance or drafting for Kipchoge. They even manufactured the course so it was flat, minimized the amount of turns and the sort of harshness of the turns. All of these things grouped together with obviously the technology involved in the shoes and the kit that the athletes wore, all result in the athletes, in Kipchoge breaking 2 hours for the marathon. Okay, so why I'm talking about these innovations first is because these innovations have sort of more recently started to trickle over onto the track and in athletics. And as we're in an Olympic year, we might see the effect of some of these things in the performances in the Olympics. Right, so just to give a little bit of insight into the evolution of shoe technology. So in 2016, the 3 Olympic medalists all wore a Nike prototype or Nike prototype shoe that nobody knew about at the time. It was a sort of white label shoe, and people didn't really know that there was new technology involved in it. Shortly after that, in 2017, the Nike Vaporfly shoe, 4%, as it was termed, and I'll get into why that was soon, was released. Then there was the first attempt at breaking the 2-hour marathon, so the breaking 2 in May 2017, which unfortunately Kipchoge didn't manage to do that time. So that was in Monza in Italy, and he ran 2 hours and 25 seconds. He then went on in 2018 to break the official world record, so not in one of these exhibition races like Monza or in the Ineos Challenge. He ran 2 hours, 1 minute and 39 seconds, and he was wearing the new Vaporfly shoes, or the Next Percent shoes. After this, we had the Ineos Challenge, and that's where he broke 2 hours for the first time, and he was wearing another prototype Nike shoe called the Alphafly. After this, the Nike Vaporfly Next Percent, so supposedly the upgrade on the Vaporfly 4%, was released. And this prompted World Athletics to have to provide some guidance on footwear and technology, because there was a lot of controversy in the media. So they released the guidelines around the technology and then so what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. And I'll go into that later in the presentation. Then the Alphafly was released to the masses. So the prototype that was worn during the Ineos Challenge. And then most recently, in the last couple of years, we've had this translation of the shoe technology onto the track. So in 2020, the world 5,000 meter record and the world 10,000 meter record for men and the world's 5,000 meter record for women was broken using this new spike technology. And if you take one look at the all-time performance lists in the marathon or in the half marathon, you'll see that most of the times have been achieved since 2016, 2017, when new footwear was introduced. So this has led to a footwear arms race, and all the other brands have released their alternative shoe to the Nike Vaporfly or Nike Alphafly shoes. The Asics version of the super shoe is the one that I think has probably came the closest and maybe could even exceed Nike's shoes, but it remains to be seen. With last year being a sort of down year due to the pandemic, I think we'll see more in the next couple of years the impact of the technology or footwear technology on performance. So to give a little bit of insight in what's inside the shoe and what's changed to allow the shoe to enhance athletes' performance, there's a series of factors. All right, so you can see the shoe has got a series of foam layers. Between the foam layers, it's got a carbon fiber scoop. And what's significant about the shoes is they've used a different foam in the foam layers. So traditionally, running shoes have used a foam called EVA as an abbreviation. But within the new Vaporfly shoes or Nike shoes, they've used something called PIBA foam, which has made a big difference. And again, I'll talk a little bit about why that's made a difference. They used a carbon fiber plate, which is not new in itself, but the shape of the carbon fiber plate is new. So the carbon fiber plate in the Nike Vaporfly shoes is curved. So there's a lot of innovation gone into that. And the stack height or the heel height of the shoe was a lot greater than what we'd seen previously for race shoes. So we're talking up to around 3 to 4 centimeters worth of height on the shoe. So people walking around in the shoes are looking 2 inches taller than what they do when they haven't got them on, but all in the name of performance. All right, and the Alphafly is advanced on that a little bit in terms of they've introduced this air bubble in the middle of the bottom foam layer. Okay, so that's what's inside the shoe. I'll talk about the contribution of each aspect of the shoe to performance as we go through the presentation. Now, to move back to your basics before we start talking about the actual effect of the shoes on performance, we'll talk a little bit about the determinants of endurance performance, which I'm sure is probably a refresher for some of you, but we have physiological basis for performance is the oxidative pathways. There's also a contribution of the anaerobic system, which is relatively small but significant, and the shorter the distance, the more significant the anaerobic contribution, obviously. In terms of mechanisms or measures that we might use to assess someone's endurance capabilities, we use maximum oxygen uptake, or VO2 max, which you might look at as the engine of the motor vehicle or the car. And then we look at lactate threshold and exercise economy, which we can look at as the fuel efficiency. We're talking about a car as our analogy. And then we look at the neuromuscular capacity, or the wheels and the suspension. Okay, so all these factors combine to determine how fast or how well someone can perform in endurance events. Now, to go sort of more specifically into running economy. So running economy is steady state O2 consumption at a given exercise intensity, and this is generally measured over a series of exercise intensities ranging from 14 up to 18 kilometers per hour. Now, running economy is significant because it doesn't matter how big your engine is or your VO2 max is if you run out of fuel. So running economy is very important in the marathon, very important in 10,000 meters. Okay. The running economy can vary by up to or around 30% in trained runners with similar VO2 max. So it is quite a changeable measure amongst the homogeneous population, so your elite athletes. And if you look at the figure on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see two athletes with the same VO2 max, but the athlete on the right-hand side, or the line on the right-hand side, as you might look at it, he's got a better running economy, so reaches his max later. So running economy is a useful predictor of performance. And if we look at this table here, so it's just a series of norm values, providing some reference for people of different training status and their running economy at 16 kilometers per hour, which is the traditional speed that we measure this at, but we can go between 12 and 18 kilometers per hour. And the lowest ever recorded value for a male athlete is 39 milliliters per kilogram per minute at 16 kilometers per hour. For a female, 43 milliliters per kilogram per minute at 16 kilometers per hour. Okay, so very important measure, and this just gives a bit of context around the norms. Now, again, I think it's important to provide context with respect to the sort of test and reliability and validity of physiological testing, and in particular running economy. So we look at your key tests here. So we were assessing VO2 max using a great exercise test, or running economy using oxygen consumption at a given speed. We might want to look at the coefficient of variation as a measure of reliability. So we look at running economy in particular. So we can see that 2% coefficient of variation is what we've seen in the literature for assessing running economy. All right, and if we were to look at a smallest worthwhile change, or what is a relevant change, it's anything above 2.2% essentially. There's a lot of factors that can affect the reliability of your tests, and footwear being one of them, but I won't go into the rest of them, but that's just to make you aware there's a lot of things that can affect the reliability of the test. And this is significant when we're talking about the magnitude of the effect of the shoes on performance. Now, if you look at running economy further, and we look at all the sort of constructs that combine to determine running economy, obviously genetics is at the top level of that sort of model, but there's a series of biomechanical factors or things that can determine running economy, and footwear being one of them, again, and how that interacts with the ground. So this is quite an interesting study and a significant study when we're trying to quantify the effect of running economy on performance, and whether changes in running economy translate directly to performance. So in this study, they looked at adding 100 grams per shoe, or 300 grams per shoe, to a group of well-trained athletes, and looked at how it affected running economy and 3,000 meter running time. And what they found is that adding 100 grams of mass per shoe degraded running economy by around about 1% over a range of speeds. Okay, and then when they looked further at that 1% degradation in running economy equated to about a 0.8% decrement in running speed over a 3,000 meter time trial. Okay, so we can see the reduction in run economy or worsening of run economy translates directly to a decrement in performance. So there's your direct link from the measure to performance. Now, if we look further into the literature and we look at this study, which provided a comparison of the energetic cost of running in marathon shoes. So there was 3 different shoes that they looked at, which was the Adidas Boost, Nike Streak, which was the Nike's sort of flagship marathon shoe before the Vaporfly came along, and the Nike Prototype, which was the Vaporfly. And what they found is that in most, well, so to go back through the study, so to provide a bit of context there, they looked more so at the properties of the foam in the shoe. And what they said is that most modern running shoes have midsoles made of foam materials that to varying degrees cushion impact, store and return mechanical energy. All right, and there's 2 key factors in this. So foam compliance, so the amount that the foam deforms, essentially when it's put under a certain amount of pressure. So the amount of compression occurs when loaded with a certain force, and the amount of mechanical energy that's stored by the foam. Then the resilience is the percent of that stored energy that is returned. Okay, so when they looked at that for the 3 shoes in question, what they found was that the compliance in the prototype shoe or the Nike Vaporfly shoe or new technology was 2 times higher than the competitors, which is significant. So generally, I don't know if people are familiar with running shoes, but if you have a running shoe that's got a softer sole or is probably more compliant, generally that is worse because you lose energy. But within the new Vaporfly technology, the resilience of the foam was much greater than the rival shoes as well. Okay, so you get an 87% energy return in comparison to a 75% in the Boost and a 65% in the Streak. Okay, so you get greater stored energy and you get a greater return of energy. So as you can see, the foam is quite a significant factor. Now they went one further and they looked at the energetic savings of the new prototype shoes in comparison to the Streak and the Boost. And this is where the 4% moniker came from for the Nike Vaporfly 4%. So what they've found is that in comparison to these rival shoes, the prototype shoe or the Vaporfly shoe led to an increase in run economy of around 4%. So if you look in the table there, you can see we get a reduction in run economy or VO2 given speeds for 14, 16 and 18 kilometers per hour in comparison to the Adidas Boost and Nike Streak shoes. So generally what they've suggested is that a 3% improvement in performance might occur in response to the 4% improvement in run economy. All right, now that might not translate directly, and there is some literature that came out recently that suggests that it may be dependent on different athletes' sort of responses to the shoe and performance levels, but I won't go into that in too much detail here. So to go one further, so Barnes and Kildin, they looked at the effects of the Vaporfly shoe in comparison to spiked shoes or athletic shoes on a track 3,000 meter time trial. And what they did is they compared the Vaporfly shoe to the Nike Matumbo, which was one of the sort of flagship spikes that they used. And they also compared it to a sort of weight matched Vaporfly shoe where they added 100 grams onto the shoe. I think it was 50 grams into each shoe, so the weight was equal. And what they found was that the Vaporfly shoe resulted in improved performance even in comparison to the spikes, which is sort of really surprising. And again, they spoke about the compliance and resilience of the midsole of the shoe and why that might be sort of effective in reducing energy cost. All right, and in a subsample of their study, they also found that there was a 1.9% improvement in race performance in 3,000 meter time trial when they were wearing the Nike Vaporfly shoe. So as I said earlier on, this was probably around 2018, 2019. The media started getting hold of the new super shoe sort of concept, and it blew up basically, and World Athletics were under a lot of pressure to provide some further sort of regulation on the footwear that was being used, because there's a lot of people suggesting that the new super shoes and Nike had kind of exploited the loose guidance previously. But what World Athletics did is they didn't really do anything. They just said, okay, well, we'll just stop where we are now. So the stack height of the shoe can't be any more than 40 millimeters, which is what the Alpha Fly shoe was, or the Alpha Fly shoe was 39.5 millimeters. And they said that for track spikes, they were going to reduce the stack height to 2.5 centimeters or 25 millimeters. And that as long as the shoes were available to all parties, then there was nothing wrong with it. Now, this is quite controversial, and World Athletics, one of their biggest sponsors is Nike. So there was a lot of sort of conspiracy theories around whether the World Athletics knew about the new Nike shoes coming out, that they were 39.5 millimeters, and that they capped it at that because they knew that 40 millimeters was above the Alpha Fly shoes stack height. So there was a lot of controversy around this. So they put some guidelines out, but they didn't really change anything, to be honest. Now, as I said, there's a lot of factors that sort of are built into the shoe that might be impacting the effect on running economy and performance as well. So the weight of the shoe, so they're slightly lighter than a lot of the rival shoes. Midsole material, which I've already discussed. And the longitudinal bending stiffness, which refers to the stiffness of the shoe. And that is more related to the carbon fiber plate. So the carbon fiber plate makes the shoe stiffer, and you get sort of a spring reaction when the shoe sort of goes into, or when the athlete goes into sort of the takeoff phase of the stance. And in this study by NIG in 2020, they looked at, or sort of discussed what they thought was the contribution of each factor to the shoe. And they generally, in their conclusion, suggested there was a complex interaction of a series of factors that all sort of came together to make this 4% or more than 4%, if we're looking at sort of plus or minus in terms of standard deviation effect. But one thing they did identify was this sort of teeter-totter effect, they referred to it within the shoe. And they highlighted that because of the curve of the carbon fiber plate, that the reaction and the sort of bounce back you get from the plate was in the right place at all times during the sort of foot strike. So as you can see here, when the athlete goes up onto the sort of toe off, you're getting the reaction from carbon fiber plate in the right sort of plane of motion or right direction. So this is one of the key factors there highlighted. Further studies have kind of suggested the relationship between running economy and performance is velocity dependent. So we're looking at elite marathoners who run at 5.7 meters per second. They might not get as much of a benefit in terms of running performance from a given increase in running economy. So there is some sort of ongoing research in this area. But all things told about the shoes have a significant impact on running economy and all of these sort of factors that they affect. So performance VO2, mean race pace, all go into improving performance. So the shoe is sort of really ergogenic in terms of the effect it has on running performance. And if we look at world records that have been broken in the last 4 or 5 years, you can see here the world records from 5,000 meters to marathon or even 1 hour on the track. All of the ones in green are the ones that were run wearing new shoe technology. So you can see in the men's distances from 5,000 to a marathon, we've had every record broken essentially since 2016, all wearing the new technology shoes. And the women's, only the 10,000 meters on the track and 10,000 meters on the road haven't been broken since 2016, or the introduction of the new shoes. So that kind of tells the story, to be honest. And again, as I said earlier on, if you look at the world all-time performance lists, so fastest times, I think it's something like 15 of the top 20 all-time marathon performances in the men's event were run since 2017. and 14 of the women's since 2017. So as you can see, it's had a major effect on endurance running performance. It's not the first time something like this has happened in sport. So for those of you who might remember, some of you may be too young to remember this now, but in 2008, there was a major controversy in the Olympic Games when a lot of swimming athletes started wearing new swimsuits, and this resulted in a series of world records getting broken. So it's not the first time. The only difference is with the supershoe technology in running, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any bans coming in place, whereas the swimsuits were banned in 2009. So, okay, so you can see quite a significant effect. Right, so to move on to the second strand of the presentation, this is something that myself and Russ and my colleagues at Teesside have looked at in a little bit more detail recently and wrote up an article. Was the effect of WaveLight technology on performance and on pacing specifically. So we look at pacing as a concept. It's the distribution of power, energy, expenditure, and or speed during an event. Okay, so it's kind of how fast we run through the event, how much our pace fluctuates, and so on. All right, so minimizing fluctuations in running speed is more economical, and it can reduce physiological disturbances. So in longer distance events, so your 5,000 meters, your 10,000 meters, your marathon, you want to run pretty even paced. Okay, and if you want to learn a bit more about pacing, this study by Abyss and Larson is a really good study, 2008. And they highlighted some of the popular pacing strategies in endurance events, or in sort of competitive and running or swimming or cycling events. And they identified positive pacing, so starting fast and getting slower. Negative pacing, starting slow and getting faster. Parabolic pacing, or a J-shaped pacing approach, starting fast, going slow or steady in the middle, and finishing fast. And even pacing. All right, so there's 4 different pacing strategies that they've identified in this study. And obviously, one of the main caveats that I want to mention before I go into the next few slides is that the way that races are run, or the pacing is done in championship races and time trial races is really different. So in championship races or your Olympic Games final, it's usually slow, 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 fast at the end. And the best person or the fastest person to sprint over 400 up to 1,000 meters is going to win that race. When we talk about world record performances or time trial performances, the pacing strategies that we would probably recommend are an even pace. So traditionally in athletics, again, for those who may not be familiar, pacemaking is commonplace. So a pacemaker is normally a designated athlete who runs part of the race at a given running speed. And he does this so that he can allow the athletes behind, or the actual competitors in the race, to draft. And if we run behind someone else in running, so it can decrease VO2 or reduce the cost of running at that speed by around 6.5%, just through reducing the air resistance or wind resistance that the athlete encounters. But there's also psychological benefits that arise from having a pacemaker or someone in front setting the pace. I don't know if anyone's ever run with someone else who's a little bit quicker than them, but it's much easier to follow them than it is for you to lead and them to follow you. In 2006, Ross Tucker and colleagues looked at the pacing of world record performances in 5,000 meters and 10,000 meters. And what they identified looking at world records ran from 1912 up to 2006 was that there was this J-shaped or parabolic approach where the athletes would start fast, then they would steady off in the middle of the race, and the last kilometre would be the fastest or second fastest if it wasn't quicker than the first kilometre. So 2 fastest kilometres of a 5K and 10K race that resulted in a world record performance were the first and the last up to 2006. So that resulted in Tucker and colleagues suggesting that world records in 5,000, 10,000 metre events characterised by fast starts and a period of slow running during the middle of the race, followed by a significant increase in speed towards the end. Okay, so until 2006, this was kind of the approach that was being taken to achieve world record performances. More recently, in a study by TL 2014 and colleagues, They looked at if there was a change in the running or pacing performance or pacing strategies used in world records by period. So they looked at 1912 to 1927 or 37, I think that is there, 1938 to 62, 62, 87, and 87 to 2012. And what they've found is that there was a decrease in the sort of variation in pace over time. So if you look at the last column of this table, you can see that the coefficient of variation, or kilometre coefficient of variation, has decreased over time. And by 1987 to 2012, we're getting this sort of just below 2% coefficient of variation, or kilometre variation. All right, and what they surmised from this, from the data they looked at, was that a carefully paced first kilometre at an even speed throughout large parts of the race emerges as the most successful pacing strategy. And they suggest that reasonable extrapolation of the world record progression suggests that the men's world record could be improved well beyond 12 minutes 30 seconds in the coming years, but this may require a kilometre coefficient of variation of 1% or less. Okay, so anything that might allow athletes to run more even paced, TL and colleagues are suggesting that might allow them to run faster. So bearing in mind this was in 2014 and we've had world records in 2020 in the 5,000 metres and 10,000 metres. So WaveLight technology came into play in around about 2018, and it's an electronic pacing tool. So again, if anyone's watched any of the Diamond League meetings or sort of world-class Grand Prix meetings in athletics in the last year or two, you will have seen this might be in the races and the distance races where they've got this lighting going around on the inside of the track that guides the athletes at a pace they want to run at. Okay, so it's an assigned pace using fluid motion, and basically what you will have seen will have happened is the pacemaker, so the athlete pacemaker, is still in the race, but instead of him having to go off his own intuition in terms of how fast he's running, there is this WaveLight technology or this sort of indicator to him the entire way around the speed that he needs to run at. Okay, so this is like a sort of big deal, because so people like myself who've run in these races where you might have athlete pacemakers without WaveLight technology. So my career went to 2016, so just before all this technology came into play. You were relying on the pacemaker getting the pace right, and you were relying on him kind of not going too fast and then slowing down, or sort of running an even pace throughout, and that was hard to come by. So it's really hard to run at a flat pace the entire time. So the invention of WaveLight technology, or the sort of introduction of this in world-class athletics, is kind of taken away the uncertainty about whether the pacemaker is going to get the speed right. The pacemaker is now there basically just to draft off, because the speed he's going to run at is going to be even paced. Now, if you remember back to a few slides ago where I talked about the coefficient of variation for kilometre splits and how if you can decrease that might result in better performance or improvements in world records. Well, in 2020, when WaveLight technology was first introduced, we've seen world records. And then what we've seen is that the coefficient of variation kilometre in the 5,000 metres was below 1%. So as suggested by TL and colleagues. There's only one record of the last 10 that's had a low coefficient of variation kilometre to kilometre. In the men's and women's 10,000 metres, you can see that the coefficient of variation kilometre to kilometre was significantly reduced in comparison to the last 9 world records. All right, so the use of WaveLight technology seems to be having an ergogenic effect and improving the pacing of the races. Okay, so bearing in mind when the pacemaker drops out normally, so the athlete pacemaker in previous years, so before 2020, when it was introduced in world-class athletics, the athlete would just have to try and run at that same pace themselves without any aids. But since 2020, they've got WaveLight technology to kind of hang on to when the pacemaker drops out at maybe 3,000 metres of a 5,000 metre race, or 6,000 metres of a 10-kilometre race. If we look at this in sort of more well, in a graphical format, which may display the data in a sort of easier way to compare. So if you look at the last point on that graph, that is the most recent world record with a standard deviation of kilometre splits. And if we compare that to the last 9, you can see that the standard deviation is pretty tiny compared to most of the last 9 world records. So based on our investigation of this, what we surmised is that kilometre variability in running speeds during the men's 10,000 women's 5,000 meters was lower than that of the last 9 world records, while only one of the previous 9 world records was lower in terms of the coefficient of variation kilometre to kilometre than the most recent one in 2020. All right, so for us, that's probably strong enough data to suggest that there is an ergogenic effect of WaveLight technology on pacing. Right, so just to highlight a little bit what's been in the media. So there's all kinds of weird stories that have been out there in the media about these super shoes or about the new technology in athletics. So the British Olympic trials marathon winner, recently wore super shoes or these Nike shoes and just painted them all black because Nike wasn't his sponsor, but he didn't want to lose out on the sort of gains and performance that they could give. So he won the marathon trials for the British Olympic team. So he's going to the Olympics wearing Nike Vaporfly shoes. So that made the press. Last year when the world records got smashed, obviously it was all over the press that the athletes were wearing super shoes. You've had sort of popular athletes come out. So athletes' kind of perspectives on this has differed. Some athletes have tried to just totally deny that the shoes are helping performance. They say that they train hard and there's no difference. They've just been training harder and that's the reason why they've got faster. But then there's other athletes who came out honestly in the media and have said, so Tegla Roop was a previous marathon world record holder, women's marathon world record holder, and she said that athletes using the high-tech shoes are cheating. So she's took sort of the one extremist view in comparison to other athletes who've got an extreme view that has no effect. You've got another sort of prominent British marathon runner who's came out and said wearing the new shoes is like having free time. So he's been around since before the shoes were introduced, and it's allowed him to gain maybe a minute and a half, probably, in his marathon PB since then. There's also been sort of media that's reported that the super shoes are making a mockery of the sport. You have athletes from the past who didn't benefit from the super shoes are saying that it's making a mockery and that the world records should be protected from pre the super shoe introduction. So had a lot of stuff going on in the media, a lot of discussion on social media. WaveLight technology has also had a bit of coverage in the media. So we've had some prominent athletes saying that WaveLight is the same as doping. So she obviously doesn't like that innovation. And we've had other athletes that have said that, or other sort of media outlets that have said that the use of WaveLight technology might end the careers of pacemakers. So believe it or not, being a pacemaker at world-class level is quite a lucrative sort of job. So they get paid quite a lot of money, but obviously it's a really hard job to run at the pace that the world records or these top-class races want you to run at. There's been a lot of stuff sort of in the press, a lot of debate. You generally have sort of polar opposites where you have people who are really against it and they're calling it technological doping, and you've got people who just kind of deny it or say that, you know, you just got to get on with it. So I think there is people in the middle, but generally it's the voice at either end that are the strongest in the media or on social media. Now this just is a final slide to finish off and just kind of illustrates the progression of technology in spiked shoes or running spikes. So we look at 1966, the spikes were just basically a leather plimsoll shoe with some nails in the bottom. And as you've gone through into 74, we've got the first real waffle spikes that were at the time, so invented over in Oregon. And as you've seen over time, so we go to 85, the shoes have got better, 98, the shoes got better again. 2008, that was a Nike Zoom Victory, so I used to wear them when I raced, a really good spike. 2016 progressed again. And then we move into 2020 where we've got these super spikes that came along. Okay, so in my opinion, I think it's evolution, and things are just going to continue to change. I think there was some quite underhand things going on at the start of the new super shoe revolution, where 2016 Olympic medalists in the marathon, they were all wearing this new shoe that nobody knew about, and coincidentally they're medaled because they were all wearing this new shoe. But yeah, I think we just have to accept that, there's been an evolution in technology, and racing is still the same, but the old times and the world records as we know them, they're basically gone, and they're going to continue to change over the next few years, I would imagine. So that's it really for the two kind of main strands I want to go through today. So I guess can open up to any questions anyone has about anything that I've spoken about today.
Just anybody can go, so you can take your chance and go for a question, please.
Do you think that kind of similar to like the swimming incident with the swimsuits, that the shoes could go that way, or do you reckon is this going to stay along the evolution as you just explained there?
Sorry, could you repeat that question? I couldn't quite hear.
Oh, sorry. So similar to the swimsuit incident where those swimsuits got banned, do you think the shoes will kind of continue with the evolution and the sport will just keep getting quicker, or do you reckon they'll come to a point where they're going to have to step in and say that this is kind of the limit?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because, this has been a sort of major jump. The only thing I can liken this to in terms of athletic development or athletics performance is the sort of change from cinder tracks back in the late 60s to synthetic tracks. I think within the spirit of the sport, maybe there comes a point where you may say, well, actually, that's too much. But I don't think that's going to happen, because if you look at these shoe companies and the sort of major brands like Nike, they invest a lot of money in athletics and in world athletics in particular. So I can't foresee a scenario where world athletics are going to really sanction these major shoe companies just because it's worth too much money to them. So the cynic in me would say that, I guess.
How much do they cost?
The Vaporfly are around 230 English pounds. So in terms of New Zealand dollars, I'm not sure how much that is. Don't know if Russ can do a conversion.
Yep, so it's around about twice the price. So $400 to $450 depending on the exchange rate.
Yeah, so the Vaporfly shoes are around about 240 English pounds. So as Russ said, double that in New Zealand dollars, and the track spikes are around about 160 English pounds. So again, that'd be around about $300, I guess. So they're not cheap.
I was gonna say, do you sort of this is gonna come to the field of shorter distances in terms of like sprinting and stuff?
Yeah, well, there was a report in the media not long ago that Nike developed this new sprint spike, and then the testing that they had with some of their elite athletes, they were running faster than the world record, 100 meters, and apparently they decided to kind of pull back on that, but there is rumours that that's already happened.
Going back to when the marathon was 2-hour marathon was broken. I mean, Nike made a big deal about how it was all about the shoe and how that was going to break the 2 hours. But you also talked about at the start of your presentation that there's a lot of other contributing factors to how they broke that 2-hour record. Do you know how much they can put down to the shoe being the biggest contributing factor, or is it a combination? But how much did the shoe actually help him break the 2 hours?
Right. So to provide a bit of context, so Eliud Kipchoge had run around about 2 hours 3 minutes before the new shoes came into play, and then he ran 2 hours 1 and 39 seconds after the shoes came into play. So you can say that the shoes themselves probably made about a minute and a half to 2 minute difference in performance. So it brought him down to around about 2-1. So to get that extra sort of minute and 30 seconds on a couple of minutes that we're looking at, I think that's where all the other factors contribute. So the pacing light, it was flat, even pace, the number of pacemakers, the sort of way that the pacemakers are formed around Kipchoge, and the course and the kit that he was wearing in terms of his vest and shorts. So I think all of them were probably worth a minute and a couple of minutes, and the shoes were probably worth a couple of minutes based on the previous world record before the shoes were introduced.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, in terms of the specifics of that, there is a few papers out there that have looked at the course design and so on. So in the first few slides, I've got references that have looked at that specifically. So if you want to look into that in more detail, there is stuff out there. But in terms of my estimations based on sort of what I've read and what I know, that's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I've just got a question. You mentioned about when the new shoes come out, they have to be a shoe that's in the market to go into the World Champs. Was that right?
Yeah, so they have to be on the market. I think it's a few weeks before the championship, or there's a few months before the championship, so that they're sort of open to all. But as you can see with the price point, they're probably not open to all anywhere. So
there's potential for them still to sneak in some new technologies into the Olympic Games. I mean, it must take a lot of development time and cost to actually make these shoes.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there is. I mean, there's also ethical things at play as well, because you've got to imagine not every athlete is sponsored by Nike. So for some athletes, they even though they know that these Nike Dragonfly spikes, which are the new spikes, might provide a greater benefits, you know, there's a risk if their shoe company says, well, we don't want you wearing their spikes, you know, it's their livelihood on the line. So if a shoe company's paying them a lot of money per year and they don't want them to break and wear sort of Nike spikes, then there's that at play as well. So there's a lot of things at play in it. Although it may appear they're making it more of a sort of level playing field, I don't think it's quite there yet.
Right. Okay. How are the other manufacturers going in regards to this? Because Nike shouldn't be the only shoe company making big progressions like this.
No, I think that a lot of them are catching up now. I think since 2019. So in 2019, for those who are sort of interested in athletics, you will have seen that the winning times of the Doha World Championships over the distance events were like a lot quicker than what you would normally expect. And Nike had just introduced some of their new spike tech then. So I think in 2019, a lot of the other brands were probably caught cold a little bit. I think they're catching up now, but there isn't any research evidence out there today comparing between the brands. I'm sure there's work ongoing, but there isn't anything out there yet that's been published.
Thank you.
I've just got a question on the back of Paul's first question there around the access to these shoes prior to major events. So if we're changing running economy and biomechanics quite significantly, or well, you know, relatively significant, how much time do you think athletes need with these shoes to get used to them, or are they a strap-on and go kind of solution?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend anyone just put some shoes on for the first time and go with them. I think probably wearing them a few times and sort of trialing them so that they're worn into your feet is probably all it would take. I mean, there was some stuff recently in the press about I think it was, I can't remember, it was London, maybe in London Marathon last year, where it was supposed to be Eliud Kipchoge and Kenenisa Bekele, who's another sort of major player in the marathon, was supposed to be coming head to head. And Bekele had to pull out of the race because of a calf problem. And there was some suggestion that the calf problem was down to the Alpha Fly shoe. and it was the first time he'd wore it in the weeks preceding that. So I think the Alpha Fly is a little bit more aggressive and might have more of a sort of lead time you would need to prepare to wear that. Whereas the Vaporfly, I don't think it has it needs wearing in as much, basically.
Thank you. I have one other question actually. You were talking about the pace and keeping the regular pace throughout the events was way better for I guess energy conservation, etc. But what does that do in relation to muscle fatigue? So is that, or is it just so much better having an even pace that the muscles should be? Do you understand what I mean? I'm sort of thinking in my own running, I need to change my gait and my pace and that sort of thing, or my muscles kind of tend to overload at a regular pace for a long time. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all depends, doesn't it? I mean, how far you're running a 5,000 meters or 10,000 meters. They're running it in 26 minutes, sorry, maximum. So I think it's all interlinked, isn't it? So if you're reducing the oxygen cost, it's going to reduce the sort of it's a complex area to get into, but you can start talking about critical speed and things like that, and sort of anaerobic reserve and things. And if you're running an even pace, you're not going above your critical speed at 10,000 meters or a marathon. So you're reducing the amount of that anaerobic reserve that you need to go into if you're keeping a flat pace. But again, I think these top athletes, they kind of know what pace they're going to need to run in a race. So if they run a world record, you can guarantee they've been training at that pace or slightly quicker for a long time before that. So they kind of know where they're at in terms of that running speed, if that makes sense.
I was just thinking, what's next? You think, there's always these kind of new innovations that are making them faster and faster. Do they pull back and do we stop at one point, or are they just going to, what's going to be the next sort of innovation that's going to decrease their running time? Because it seems to be going on, I guess.
So I think the thing with athletics is it's been quite a traditional sport for a lot of years, so not a lot's changed. All right, so you might have these minor improvements over time. Since the late 60s, when they changed from cinder tracks to synthetic tracks, that is. And then all of a sudden you've got these real sort of big jumps. I guess it's hard to say really. I mean, what could it be next? Could it be the track surfaces? I don't know. I mean, possibly, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think these two innovations are really big anyway. You've never seen anything like this in athletics. I mean, it seems ridiculous that it's taken this long for WaveLight technology, for instance, to come into play. But when you look back, nobody probably thought about that until pretty recently. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say really, I guess. I mean, I guess you can look at cycling as sort of a sport where, that sometimes they don't even race each other. They just look at the watch and know that they can ride at a certain wattage for a certain distance or a certain gradient. And they think, well, if someone beats me, good luck to them. So I think cycling is kind of the next level of technology or technological evolution, I guess.
There must be a lot of study in the gait and cadence and foot placement and do these shoes help encourage a good and efficient gait or running style? They're really odd shape, like a ball of the foot runner.
Yeah, I guess they're slightly curved, so they're sort of assisting the sort of foot strike in the plant. I mean, there's a lot of reports from athletes saying that when you wear them shoes for training, even they beat your legs up less, so your legs feel fresher after training and things like that. So I guess they just minimise fatigue, and obviously when you fatigue, a lot of compensations that you might have, or a lot of weaknesses that you might have in terms of your running gait become sort of exaggerated. So I guess if they can sort of reduce the fatigue, they can sort of improve your mechanics for longer, or keep your mechanics stable for longer.
Any other questions? One last one from me then, Jonathan, and we'll let you go.
Yep.
So, and sorry for us, has any, or Luke. So our next speaker is coming in to have a chat to us about ISO inertial measurement units in Seoul. So, and he's doing a fair bit of work around that with his runners down on the track. How long do you think until runners are wearing a watch that gives them live feedback from their shoe? Do you think that's something that's kind of happening or in the cards, or is that not something that you see coming up yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a few sort of years, or a few sort of reports over the last few years of power meters being introduced in running. Yeah. So those sensors in shoes and power meters. I think I forgot what there was one on, but I forgot what it's called. But I mean, if you look at running watches now, they give you your cadence, they give you things like that. So I don't think it's going to be too long before someone does that. It's just at what point does it become overloaded? So, you know, part of the beauty in athletics is when you race, you just race. You're not really worried about the feedback so much, and people aren't looking at the watches all the time and stuff. Whereas for me, watching cycling, for example, there's a little bit of that gone. It's just someone looking at. I mean, I remember there's a few years ago, Chris Froome, when he won the Tour de France, people were like attacking on the hill, on the mountains, and he wasn't even watching them. He was just looking at his power meter because he knew that he could ride at a certain sort of cadence or certain power output for so long. And I think it won't be long before people introduce that type of stuff. But whether that's a good thing for the sport, I don't really think it is. I guess the last event for the purists is cross country. I guess cross country running is never going to change because they're not going to work when you're in ankle deep mud, which is what we do in Europe. So yeah.
Thank you, Russell, Luke. I'll hand over to you guys if you want to take questions.
Nice. I think you sort of touched on it, John. I listened to a podcast quite recently with Meb Kefliger. I can't pronounce his last name, but the US marathon runner. And he spoke about the super shoes just from a point of view. His point of view of an athlete was he reckoned he could have probably got 2, 3, 4 more marathons in his career as a result of wearing those shoes. And for, you know, he's won New York and Boston, so probably winning 100 grand a race. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that idea of career longevity, or is that maybe an underrated factor that we're missing with these shoes?
No, I agree. I mean, I would agree with what he says. I think based on the reports from different athletes, I think it sounds like that's what's happening, doesn't it? They beat your legs up less than your traditional shoes. I'm actually going to buy a pair myself soon because they're on sale on Nike's website. So yeah, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that soon when I'm sort of back to my former glories.
And I suppose just for those in the room who don't know just how good a runner you were, but towards the back end of your career, you were sponsored by Hoka, who were sort of the pioneer, really, of the Super Stack shoe. Mm-hmm. Did you see a benefit just to transition into Hokas, and then, yeah, hopefully we'll get you back in a year's time or something and hear about your super shoe journey?
Yeah, to be fair, when I started wearing Hoka shoes, I didn't really like them, but I was being given them for free off Hoka, so I just wore them. But like, yeah, I didn't like them that much. So, yeah, I didn't like the stack height being so high. So, but I don't think they had all the other benefits. So, you know, and there's nothing wrong with walking around being a few inches taller, is there? So, it's got its benefits, I guess.
That's all for me.
Yeah.
I think Johnny and I could speak for hours on this. So for the purpose of you getting on with your class, I think it's maybe best that at least I shut up. I don't know if anyone else has any more questions for Johnny.
Luke, have you got any questions on the other end of the line there?
No questions from our end that will be asked. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. the chat to us today, Johnny. Really appreciate it. Sorry, I just realised I think I spelled your name wrong in the new invite. There's a little bit of a rushed thing there with the last one not working. But
no worries.
Like Russ said, maybe we'll get you back in a year and we'll see everything that's new and what they've come up with between now and 22, especially after the Olympics. I guess that's always a exciting time to see what comes out of it. So yeah, on behalf of us, thank you very much, and we'll have a chat soon, hopefully.
Yep, no worries. Thanks. I hope you all found it interesting.
Yeah, and good luck with your career revival.
I'm too old now. See you later.
Thanks, Johnny.
Bye.